Because unfortunately the U.S. citizenry is heavily brainwashed, I have to argue comprehensively that radiating and scanning people's naked bodies and molesting them at the airport is unjustified. So I'm going to continue with part 2 of this video that argues against the body scanners and molestation at the airports. So far, just to summarize briefly, I have demonstrated that the terror threat is extremely overblown and exaggerated, that there is essentially no terror threat. There is some, but it's, completely exaggerated by those in power for their nefarious agendas. And then what terror threat does exist has been exacerbated dramatically and knowingly by U.S. actions. So, moving on. Point 3. Even if we are to disregard entirely the fraudulent nature of the official 9/11 reports and other alleged terrorist attacks, and the myriad questions that exist surrounding the official stories of other alleged terrorist attacks, that is, if we are to assume that these were all terrorist attacks with an external perpetrator, namely an Islamic radical, one is still less likely to die in a terrorist attack on an airplane than one is to die in a lightning strike. Hundreds of thousands are killed on highway accidents every year in the U.S. Don't quote me on that. I don't know exactly how many are killed annually in the U.S. in highway accidents. I did not verify that. It's countless people in any case. It's, it makes the terror threat, pale in comparison. Obviously, the terror threat pales in comparison to countless other causes of death. Thousands are killed as a result of unsafe workplace conditions in the U.S. Countless people are killed from smoking, from a variety of medical conditions, etc., etc., etc. If the goal is to increase safety, installing these body scanners and molesting people at airports is an extremely weak place to start. Why doesn't the government increase their warnings about lightning? It would be more rational and more related to safety than what they're doing with Homeland Security and the TSA at airports. There are so many ways to increase safety without shredding our rights that it makes these government cries of terrorism and safety sound laughably absurd. They are simply absurd. Point number 4. If we allow anomalies to justify policy decisions, we are lining our own coffins and loading the guns directed at our own heads. If every time a so-called and typically fraudulent terrorist incident, or for that matter crime, occurs and we allow policy changes to be made, we are justifying a gradual shutdown of society, and nothing less. There is no clear place to draw the line if we do not draw it at the point where our dignity is being decimated. Every time there is a terrorist incident, manufactured or real, the government can implement another policy that further restricts vast swaths of the populace. Look at the levels of surveillance and intrusion prior to 9/11. Look at it now. Imagine what it will be like in 50 years from now if things continue to exacerbate at the current rate. Given that the impetus is demonstrably not safety related, we can assume that they will attempt to exacerbate the emerging police state continually if we do not do anything to stop it. Or they will attempt to do so regardless. And will be successful if we do not sufficiently combat it. Point number 5. If we allow policies to be made without requiring that they be justified by precedents, we are lining our own coffins and loading the guns directed at our heads. Once again, we are giving the government carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they feel is justified if we do not hold their feet to the fire and demand that they justify their policy decisions by pointing to incidents that make said policy decisions reasonable. There are no such precedents on airplanes. Even if you accept the official 9/11 story, having a lower chance of being killed than in a lightning strike hardly constitutes a precedent for a massive policy change. And if so, let's start molesting people at their workplaces, on the streets, and in front of their homes before they leave, too. And this is the direction we're headed in, as indicated by declassified Homeland Security documents. You can Google search FOIA, Freedom of Information Request, Homeland Security, TSA, body scanners, and pat-downs. Also, there has, to my knowledge, never been a terrorist attack on an Amtrak train. And this is a slight divergence but it's still on the topic of homeland security. It's a slight divergence from my argument against the airport policies. But yeah, to my knowledge, there's never been a terrorist attack on an Amtrak train, yet despite this, some train stations randomly swab bags with drug detectors and otherwise inspect them, have ubiquitous announcements, some broadcast on television screens, urging people to be paranoid about their fellow citizens as well. This is an instance of the government implementing a policy without precedent. Remember, the discussion up until this point does not deal with personal preference and the potential psychological harm of the policies. Whether you feel these policies are an inconvenience is another topic to be discussed below. Here we are just addressing justification. Further undermining the safety claim is the fact that Homeland Security has plans to employ psychological profiling devices. You can view the TSA's official video online if you do not believe me. The Orwellian nightmare has become our reality. Hey, if you think this is science fiction, this is now reality. They have not implemented these behavior scanners yet, but they have plans to do so if we do not resist sufficiently. You will enter a tent-like structure at sporting events, and you will have your subversive intent read by a machine. Again, no precedent and clearly a horrific policy with potentially incredibly disturbing implications. Number 6. I suppose that, given the depravity of our modern world and the insane degrees to which those in power have gone to legalize and institutionalize sadism, I actually have to state that molestation is a psychologically harmful thing. The newly approved enhanced pat-downs are the equivalent of sexual assault. If a normal citizen engaged in these techniques, not pedestal-elevated government officials, but, the lowly proles, the plebes, the scum, as they are viewed by the government, they would face legal action, perhaps prison, depending on the severity of the sexual assault, and rightfully so. It is not enough that the government has a monopoly on the use of force. Now they can commit acts that are otherwise considered sick when committed by others, with impunity and immunity. When the TSA squeezes the genitals of children in the breasts of women, this is highly traumatizing and can cause severe psychological problems of various kinds, including but not limited to anxiety, depression, irrational fears, and etc. The effects of molestation by the state or anyone else are compounded for those who have endured sexual abuse or been raped in the past. For those individuals, this can amount to a re-traumatization, a reliving of the initial experience, plunging the individual back into the torturous depths of his or her painful memories. 1 in 4 women are raped throughout their lifetime, and an additional 18% have to fend off rape attempts in the United States. So we aren't just talking about a few people here and there, especially when countless people are subject to these enhanced pat-downs on one flight or another. Typically, it's if you refuse to go through the body scanner, and they also have implemented random molestation, so-called pat-downs, for passengers even after they go through the body scanner. Number 8. I don't mean to sound like a moral pedestal climbing Christian here, but this amounts to a perversion of one of the few societal norms that I actually support, and it is one that I support fully, with rage and passion and without reservation. The view that rape and sexual assault are unhealthy, violating, sick, unjust acts that should be treated as such. From an early age, individuals will now be conditioned that it is okay for the government to sexually assault them. I mean, this is the most horrific aspect of this. People are being taught that it is okay to be violated. People are being rendered docile, submissive, drone-like, emotionless. This amounts to a potential shattering of the psyche, rendering individuals, causing individuals to be, for causing the psyches of individuals to essentially shatter in the sense that they are no longer, healthy human beings. I mean, this really amounts to a normalization of absolute violation and hell. Um, from there, it's a slippery slope into justifying sexual assault by anyone, and of course, justifying sexual assault by the government is just as bad as justifying sexual assault by anyone else. In a fundamentally sick culture where rape and sexual assault are already ubiquitous, glorified, and normalized by the media, movies, television, and etc., this amounts to a further decimation of our humanity and a further metastasizing of the neuroses that is rendering people who deserve to live healthy lives in healthy communities traumatized, anxiety-filled, pain-stricken, and generally miserable. Do you understand? I mean, I really cannot stress this enough to those of you who think this is acceptable, who are apathetic about it, who are ignoring it because you don't really mind it, it just takes a second, etc. I can't stress this enough. They're telling you that it's okay to be sexually assaulted. They are perverting your norms and your morality and your boundaries and your ability to feel safe. Your ability to feel safe. If we have no other rights, it is, we should have the ability to feel safe. And this is being fundamentally undermined throughout our culture in a variety of ways, and this is just another slap in the face, another nail in the coffin, another violation, another strike in the face, another beat down into docility and submission by this tyrannical Nazi scumfuck government that deems it okay to sexually assault you in airports without justification as a furtherance of this tyrannical hell of a police state that we see emerging that one can rightfully liken to Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World or a combination of the two. Absolutely sick. I cannot stress that enough. Get that through your head. Number 9. But I don't mind it, quote unquote. This is for those that say, well, I don't mind it. I don't mind it. If you don't mind being molested, then you have had your humanity taken from you and you have been rendered docile by this sick society. Remember what it was like to be innocent and fight like hell against the forces that have destroyed your innocence. Now, if it is simply a risk you are willing to take and don't mind being exposed to levels of radiation that some health professionals view as unhealthy and cancer-causing, and don't mind strangers seeing your naked body, I would offer the same critique to a lesser extent and add the following. It is not my intent here to argue against personal preference, as to do so is clearly an impossibility if we accept that objectivity in the realm of ethics cannot be said to exist. Rather, it is my intent to demonstrate that they are unjustified and that the aim and result is not safety or security related. I'm reaching the time limit once again, so I'm going to make a part 3 to share my final thoughts on what I view as an incredibly horrible development in the realm of civil liberties in the United States.